Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and also a happy Columbus Day to all the listeners today. We're not taking today off. Christopher Columbus would have wanted us to record a podcast and for you guys to listen to it. So I'm here expressing that discoverer spirit that made our country and made our continent and brought the Europeans here by releasing a new Highly Respected. So hopefully what better way to celebrate Columbus Day than to do this. So today we're of course going to have an incredible episode to honor Christopher Columbus's memory. I'm really going to talk about Columbus today because there's a ton of other news topics to get into before having a whole spiel about Columbus. So first topic we're going to begin is something we talked about last week. It's actually pretty much the only topic we talked about last week, but there's been new updates, and we're going to talk about Ukraine. Now, before we begin, somebody challenged me to properly pronounce the 4 provinces or the oblasts that Russia has annexed. So I am going to begin this podcast by doing this. So 1, we have Donetsk. 2nd, we've got Lugansk. The 3rd, we got Zaporizhia. I was worried about pronouncing that one last week because I was like, this looks intimidating. But I learned through my high IQ how to pronounce it. And then the 4th, we've got Kherson, which sometimes one of the funny things is I've noticed that in English they pronounce the K, which for whatever reason the Slavic countries don't pronounce the K. Like it's Kharkov and Kharkiv, rather than, pronouncing the K. There's also something weird with like Lugansk and how they pronounce it, because I think the Ukrainians pronounce it Luhansk or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, they should anglify their names for us. This is America's world. If America's going to run the world, they should have settlements and places that are easier to pronounce for American speakers. That's how we got to do this. They should just change these names to something like Zachary or Kevin Province or something like that. Something for us easy to pronounce. But I had to do that before we began. And we're also going to have some more hard to pronounce words later on because the big news over the weekend is the Kerch Bridge was, there was a terror attack on it. I guess you would call it a terror attack because, it was like a truck bomb that the Ukrainians likely tried to blow up the Kerch Bridge. It made some serious damage to it, but the Kerch Bridge is still operating, not totally destroyed. And that bridge, it connects the Russian mainland to Crimea. It was a major deal when they built it after they had annexed it in 2014. They built it pretty quick. I think they built it in like 2 years. And like thinking about like any American infrastructure project, no matter what, it takes like 20 years to build anything here. Even think about something, bring up examples like the DC subway system. They try to like have these additions to the DC subway system, and they always take like 5 or 10 years. And imagine them, the Russians built a 12-mile bridge within 2 years, and that it can withstand a massive truck bomb. That's something that's impressive to whatever your views on Russia and Ukraine are. You have to admit that's pretty impressive. If the Chinese have built it, the bridge may have collapsed just under the truck's weight. So, I think the Russians could at least build something to withstand a truck bomb. So that's become a news story, and it's showing that, Ukrainians are escalating matters into their own hands. And also is released, I think even last week, maybe the week before, but very recently, is that America announced or told the New York Times that the Ukrainians were responsible for Dugin's daughter dying. If you guys remember that story, Alexander Dugin's daughter was riding in a car and she was blown up by a car bomb. And sure enough, like anything that bad happens in this war, like if there's executed Russian POWs, if there's shelling of Russian POW camps or shelling of Russian cities that Russia is occupying, or Nord Stream exploding, or random Russians being killed, or even the bridge bombing, it's somehow Russians are responsible for this. And so the mainstream media said like, oh, it's an FSB hit. And it's like, why would Russians kill like the daughter of Dugin? Like that doesn't make any sense at all. And sure enough, the American intelligence agencies told the New York Times like, we weren't responsible for this. We didn't approve it. It was the Ukrainians. And it looks like the Ukrainians did the bridge bombing, even though once again they're trying to say Ukrainians were like, maybe this is the work of the Russians. It's like, why are the Russians try to bomb their own bridge that they spent billions of dollars on that is like crucial to their war effort and to their like esteem. Like they're not going to blow up their own bridge. And it's the same with like, why would they blow up Nord Stream? None of these theories make sense, but they just promote it and people believe these lies. And so they're going into this war effort like that. But the Kerch Bridge then prompted retaliatory strikes from Russia, as that there was a bunch of missile strikes today on critical infrastructure in Ukraine. So now Russia is escalating the war effort. So there's just some thoughts to talk about the war and where it's going. Also, throughout last week, Russians were retreating more from Kherson, further down. They were not taking many casualties. There is reports that they weren't even leaving weapons behind. It's a very orderly retreat, but it still does not look good when you're retreating from lines that you once had. So I need to restate what I think is going to happen here. Even though I did this whole big podcast on how Russia's not going to win the war and it's not going to have this major impact that people think it is, and it's not going to be a blow for the globalist American empire that a lot of people are saying like, oh, it could happen, it's around the corner. I still think Russia is going to retain the 4 oblasts that they annexed recently. There's going to, from the lines that the Ukrainians have, once there are more reserves getting put in there, once the line is stabilized, you're going to see those guys push back. I think most of the territory that Russia has lost, even probably in Kharkov, that area, that Russia's probably going to take it back. But I don't think that they're going to gain significant amount of territory. I don't think they're going to have a type of strike on Kiev that they once did. There is talk. I was seeing reports that saying Belarus and Russia are about to do some type of deployment together. Maybe they might try to do a new offensive against Kiev through Belarus. I don't know. There's things. I don't think that, relatively speaking, that a lot of the things that we thought were going to happen at the beginning of the war and we've seen happen, that they were going to easily, the Ukrainian army was going to collapse, that they were going to easily topple the government and put in a friendly regime. I just think that the opportunity for that to happen has already passed. And the most that they can do is ensure that Ukraine can't take back any more territory, that they're not going to take back the annexed territories, and they're going to be slowly pushed back from where they are. What you may see, especially in the winter, is that once Russia regains the initiative, once they take back some of that territory that they lost in the face of Ukrainian offenses, is that you'll see the war return to what it was like in the summer, where they're making incremental gains on the Ukrainians, they're shelling them, they're making them take heavy casualties, and they're slowly taking territory and slowly wearing down the Ukrainian war machine. And they're just like sucking, and Ukrainians have nothing to do but just send more bodies there to get blown up. And you may see a return of that. And it's like becomes a very costly war effort that, looks not great for Ukraine if they're not having the type of advances that they are. And this war, the only time I could see that the war ending is if Europe really puts its foot down and says, we're really tired of funding this. They have to have a peace solution. And whatever peace solution it's going to be is that Ukraine, unless there is some major reversal, such as maybe there's a new surprise offensive going through Kiev, and it actually works this time or something of that. I don't know. Once again, this is like Western observers. We don't know the full story of the details, but I don't think that that's going to work again. Unless something like that happens, the situation is not going to radically change, but Ukraine may not be able to wage the war in the way that they want, without the type of money and without the weaponry, without the support that they have. And so they'll have to make some type of agreement with the Russians. And what's most likely going to happen is that Ukraine may sign some that they'll never formally join NATO, but they're not going to demilitarize. That regime is going to be hostile to Russia and fully in the camp of the West. But all that's going to happen is that there's some type of recognition that that territory is not theirs. What you could see happen is what happened in North Korea, or in Korea rather, where there's just this demilitarized zone that acknowledges that, one side, North Korea is on this side, South Korea is on this side. Both believe that they're the real Korea and that they control the other side. And it'll probably be happening there, where the Russians say that they control these territories, but Ukraine keeps putting them as part of Ukraine in their maps, and they still refer to them as Ukrainian territory. They don't formally recognize that they're part of Russia, but by practical purposes, they are part of Russia, and Ukraine is no longer fighting over them. And that's what you really could see happen. Whether this is like a huge win for Putin, I mean, gaining new territory that's like, and a lot of important stuff is in those territories. That is a win for them, but at what cost? I think, and I talked about this last week, but just to reiterate these points, is that Putin no longer has as much influence over Europe after this war. He's largely cut off, especially with the Nord Stream bombings. He doesn't have the type of intimidation he wielded over Eastern Europe, I think, as that he did before, because when seeing that there's this like nobody could withstand the Russian military on Eastern Europe, and that there were going to be this military colossus to easily come in and wipe away the Ukrainians, even though the war is not settled yet, it does show that the Ukrainians can stand up to them, withstand an assault, and even potentially hold them off, and only keep them in certain areas of the country and protect their capital. I know that's a win for them, and they can't wield the type of intimidation factor on Ukraine and other countries as they did before. And it also shows that the West will come in and aid anyone who's assaulted by Russia. It's also going to create problems with what's going to, as what I said, with Belarus. And there's other things that Russia may do to retaliate against the West, such as weaponizing migration to punish the West for their continued support of Ukraine, which I don't think is anyone wants to defend. So it's an interesting scenario. I think even if Russia gains that territory, they're going to be much weaker on the global stage. Also, they're now far more dependent on China and India, that they had more independence before because, they had better relations with Russia or Europe, but now those relations are over. So they're much more dependent on China for economic and other types of transactions. So they're now fully within the Chinese sphere, not within their own, not quite sovereign and autonomous as they were before, and not wielding the type of influence over Europe, which I think is a huge blow to Moscow. I think the original point of the war was to show that they are the boss of Europe, that they can go in, knock out this Ukrainian government, return it to the Russian sphere, and Europe isn't going to do anything about that, and Europe needs to acknowledge that Moscow has to be respected at least as much as Washington. And this is going to be the new European arrangement. But that's the opposite happened. I mean, now Europe is more dependent on Washington, more dependent on America. And Russia is now seen as the enemy of Europe. And they're willing to cripple their economies to show that newfound or that new direction in their foreign policy. So I want to get into a topic about saying, what does this, or reoriented this to the greater geopolitical scale? People love saying geopolitics, so we're going to say geopolitics here. And what this means for Europe, what this means for America, what this means for Russia, where does Europe go from here? And as I was alluding to, and I talked about last week, is that I think Europe was much friendlier to Russia before the war, and even much more so than America. Merkel had decent relations with Putin. Macron had decent relations with Putin. Really, the only extremely solid anti-Russian countries in Europe were Scandinavia. I don't know about Norway too much, but I know Sweden and Finland have never liked Russia. Long-standing historical animosities. I understand why Finland hates Russia. I mean, if my whole country's history is tied up with being oppressed by Russians and fighting for Russians to gain independence, I would understand that. That's not my history, but that's the history of many of these people on the borderlands with Russia. And of course, Eastern Europe, with Poland leading the charge. So those were primarily, but in Western Europe and UK, even though the UK is no longer in the EU, they still, part of the greater European sphere, still have some sway there, and they're extremely anti-Russia in their orientation. But Germany, France, most of these Central Europe and Italy, there wasn't as much hostility towards Russia, and they they may have not been the biggest fan of Putin, but they're like, we'll deal with him, we'll work with him, we'll see what's the matter. And Merkel had a much better relationship with Putin. And even when Scholz, who's the new chancellor, came in for Germany, he appeared to even be more pro-Russia. Or pro-Russia is maybe not the best way to phrase it, but a more hospitable attitude towards Russia than even the CDU, the center-right CDU, with his Socialist Party. The Greens are extremely anti-Russia, which is funny because the Greens got a lot of funding from the Russians initially to help wreck Germany's own energy output so that make them more dependent on Russia. They achieved that goal, but instead it's making Germany even more dependent on America due to this war and the cutting off supplies from Russia. So Western Europe was willing to make more amends with Russia, and also with UK leaving through Brexit, leaving the EU through Brexit. It seemed like the only power block that they had to really worry about was Eastern Europe and opposing many of these methods. And Putin understood this, and I think one thing we have to realize is that Putin misjudged a lot of how the world will respond to this. I think Putin, when he invaded, he misjudged or misinterpreted or got the wrong impression from what the U.S. leaving Afghanistan was. He saw this as U.S. returning to a non-interventionist mode, that they're going to start reducing its presence throughout the world. They're tired of paying for all these wars and interventions and these entanglements overseas. They want to return. He interpreted that withdrawal as there. But that was wrong to interpret that, because we were merely withdrawing to focus on Asia, not the Middle East, not these Muslim countries anymore, and we were pivoting from there. And also, as it appears with the Ukraine conflict, to focus more on Europe. It would have been better or smarter for Putin to have invaded Ukraine if we were still in Afghanistan rather than after we had withdrawn, because he misinterpreted what that meant. And he also thought that Europe, due to its energy dependence on Russia and the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, would be more willing to look the other way or not get themselves too heavily invested in this conflict and not trying to help out the Ukrainians. And so he interpreted this thing as that America wanted to withdraw from the world, was not interested in new conflicts, not interested in new wars, and it was not going to put like the 40 billion or so, or the a massive amount of investment into the Ukrainian war effort that they have now done. He thought that by looking at Afghanistan, because I think Russia would have probably not invaded had we withdrawn from, if we had not withdrawn from Afghanistan. I think Putin took that the continuing occupation in Afghanistan as proof that America would involve itself into anything that Russia did. Reminder, Russia had a perfect opportunity to invade in 2014, and it didn't, primarily because they were worried that NATO would intervene and that they were not able to withstand these sanctions. One thing that Putin did do is that he made his country much more resistant, or much better able to survive Western sanctions after 2014. And I think one thing that people, the West probably thought that would have a greater impact on Russia were these crippling sanctions. But I wouldn't say sanction-proof, but close to sanction-proof. Putin has made a decent job of making his economy more resistant and more able to withstand sanctions from the West than it was before. But in spite of that one upside, they've lost Europe. They can, maybe there could be some rapprochement between them, but who knows? And it doesn't look good for those chances that Europe is now moving closer to Washington and away from Moscow, we've talked about. And so he misjudged that. He misjudged the American response. He also misjudged Ukraine. He thought that their army would collapse and that, Zelensky and his cronies would flee and they'd be able to impose their own government in there. That didn't happen. So there was a lot of miscalculations of this. And somebody, I was talking about with friends of whether this was a colossal failure. I think that this was, or a colossal mistake. I think it was a mistake, but whether it's a colossal mistake, the colossal part still remains to be determined. He can still gain something by this, but what he gains, is that worth in what he gave away? That's going to remain a question. I think he could still muster up some kind of small victory from this conflict. But Europe is moving away. And so I think, and I made some criticisms of Giorgia Meloni, who's the new, or soon-to-be Italian prime minister, so far as the coalition stays intact, and her, support for the Ukrainian conflict. But for a lot of these European nationalists, they are torn by their decisions. There are three power blocks that they can ally their country to. Actually, four if you count China. Is that they have Moscow. Moscow, weak economy, hated by America, is in a weakened doesn't even have as strong of a military as it did before. It's a pariah of the world, does not offer much as it did prior. I think even before the war it offered a counterweight to America, but I think that counterweight in European eyes is just not there. So that power base is not an attractive option for a lot of these Europeans. Many of these nationalists do want friendlier relations with Russia. Most of the people, both of the nationalist candidates in Zemmour and in Le Pen in France, both wanted friendlier relations with Russia in the war, but they were not going to center around their foreign policy and their nation's trajectory into being a close ally with Russia. They just wanted slightly better relations with them and to less antagonism. They're not going to join the power base. Because one problem with Europe is that these countries alone do not have the power to determine their destiny. They have to be part of a power block. They have to be a part of something else. And many of these countries don't even have defense capabilities. Like they have strong economies. They have a high standard of living, but they're not in control of their own destiny. They don't have true sovereignty. They are subject to the behest of other powers. And they really are torn now between Brussels and Washington. And so for a lot of these countries, they have to make a decision whether they want to be more friendly to Brussels or they want to be more friendly to Washington for some of these states. I don't think that they're going to try to leave the EU formally, but it's way to counter the other side that may be demanding more from them on who they have closer economic ties with. And with what Meloni wants to do is she wants to build closer relationship with Washington than with Brussels. Now, what are the arguments for this? I would say this, even though a lot of people, especially me and some others, have said that when you accept the globalist American empire, it's a deal with the devil. Is that means you're going to get gay pride parades and you're going to get mass migration and all these things. Some of that is true, especially with I think some of the Eastern European countries. Not so much on the mass migration part, but maybe some of the LGBT stuff. But Washington doesn't have as much power into wielding that, or is not as insistent on it as the EU. Now, this is the case so far. This could change in the future, but this is how it is now. The EU is the one that is demanding these countries in Eastern Europe, such as Poland and Hungary, and it was also demanding this from UK, which is a big reason why the UK left the EU, was over the immigration issue, and the EU demanding that they take in a set number of migrants, is that the EU is the one is pushing these countries to take in migrants. They're the ones, if they block a gay pride parade, that they're like, we're going to come down and punish you for that. While America does push for this stuff, they don't formally sanction these countries for doing that. They may be like, hey, can you, allow this pride parade to happen? Or, hey, can you maybe let in a few more migrants? But they're probably more okay with these countries restricting immigration than the EU is. The EU is in a more restrictive mode right now, especially because they saw as how much turmoil the 2015 migrant crisis caused, and they are more open to their countries, setting up border defenses and kicking migrants out and try to deport. They are more open to that, but that's not for all their institutions. They do have a human rights court. Terrible idea that restricts these countries from enforcing immigration law. And that human rights court is still able to have influence over the UK, which is how it left the EU. The human rights court blocked the UK deporting migrants to Rwanda, which Rwanda was willing to accept a lot of these illegal migrants that no one else wanted. They were going to send them to Rwanda, and then the Human Rights Court blocked it, and the Human Rights Court has blocked all these countries from deporting them. America, if they knew that the price for getting these countries to, swear off Russian energy, to commit themselves to war efforts against Russia, and to commit themselves to being hostile to China, if the price for that was allowing them to deport migrants to Africa and to put walls around their borders, America would make that deal, which some people are going to get mad about at this point, is saying, and I think we do really see America as the root of it, but America is the global supremacy of America is much more cynical than we think. And a lot of this is determined by traditional power, state power politics. There is an ideology to it, but it's willing to moderate that in order for the goal of countering who it views as its chief geopolitical enemies. And it's the same with like Saudi Arabia. Like, we are not demanding Riyadh host pride parades, okay? We do try to not alienate a lot of these hardcore Muslim countries in order to keep them on our side, even though it's not paying off. I mean, OPEC is cutting production primarily to screw us over. But that's in regard. And I think we're going to see this with Eastern Europe. This could theoretically change. I mean, like, let's say we get all these countries totally loyal to us. You know, we put more troops into Poland and all these other places. And then eventually we're like, okay, you got to take in migrants. But we don't have the type of leverage over them in the same way that the EU does, because the EU can place immediate sanctions on these countries. They can, cut off their funding immediately. America, if they're depending on as much for America for that, I mean, we could pull out troops or other things, but we're not going to pull out troops if they're not like bringing in migrants, because the ultimate purpose is standing against Russia and standing against China rather than it is to welcome in the entire world into Europe. They do want Europe. America does want Europe under our thumb and loyal to us and dependent on us. But at the same time, we're willing to make concessions, probably more so than the EU. And I think this is Meloni's thinking, is that if she shows more loyalty to Washington, she will have more maneuverability to do things in Italy that the EU doesn't want her to do, but she can compensate for that by support from America. And I think you're going to see that from a lot of these countries. And I think one thing is about this war is that Poland is trying to be the central player of Europe from this, which is funny because Europe is at the bottom of the net beneficiaries of the EU. Like, if you look at all these like things like net contributors, it's like Germany at top. Net beneficiary, like these people are gaining more from Europe than they are putting in. And at the bottom is Poland. There are, you think about this as like inner cities, is like, they're the ones gaining all the benefits while the suburbs are paying for it. Germany is the suburbs. Poland is the ghetto. I mean, it's still a nice country. It still has like some economic strength. It's not, totally like Detroit or something, but it does take more than it gives. But they're trying to be America's point man in Europe, and they're showing their loyalty. They're like, we are firmly committed to this war. We want more troops here. We love America. We're actually wanting to we're demanding reparations from Germany. We don't like how these Germans are so arrogant and what the terrible things they did to us in World War II. We just love America. God bless America. They're seeing it as that. Well, Germany is much more... and Germany and France are not as loyal to America. They want a peaceful solution. America knows that, but they know that they're weak. America knows that they're weak, and they don't have the power to just say, end this war. We are tired of this. They're subservient to America. France has a little bit more leeway than Germany does, or a little bit more free of, space to declare independence from that. But Germany does not. And America sees them as an unreliable partner. They see them as somebody who's willing to do business with Russia, as somebody who is wants the war to end. And they don't see them as quite the partner that they should. And they're seeing from the other side in Poland, the strongest soldier of the globalist American empire there, ready to do this. And for the price of it, and it also Poland's pissed off the EU for their sanctioning them, for criticizing their moves and reforming their judiciary and their migration moves and their limitation on LGBT indoctrination. And so one funny thing is that we may be spreading all this transgender stuff in our world, but in Eastern Europe, we'll be saying like, sure, you can ban trans surgeries, whatever. We just need you to make sure that you're loyal to us and are going to fight Russia. And Poland may prove that regard. That's one thing I think that the trans stuff is going to have pushback, is that it's not going to help us on the global stage, because everywhere except for Western Europe is horrified by our zeal to change every kid's gender. And they have to, and this is a big reason that we pushed integration so hard back in the 50s and 60s was because we felt we had to do this on the world stage when we're competing against communism, and we're competing against them, and they're like, hey, Soviet Union is portraying us as a racist country that brutalizes blacks. We need to have Civil Rights Act in order to counter that argument and to look better on the world stage. And now these countries, as it's seen in Putin's speech, are showing that, like in America, they want to do all these terrible these surgeries to your child. They want to change your child's gender and indoctrinate them with these crazy ideas. And pretty much throughout the world, except for Western Europe, is like horrified by this, including in Eastern Europe, all of Africa, all of the Middle East, pretty much all of Asia. And now that's the counterweight. And I think America may be like, if they're seeing like China and Russia and India and all these countries like make waves into other parts of the world by saying like, hey, America, if you accept American influence, your child is going to, they're going to change your child's gender. And that may work. And they're like, we might need to pull back on this because this is hurting our efforts globally. And so that's one reason I think that the trans stuff may be turned into a fad. I'm trying to be white-pilled here. Everyone always accuses me of seeing trends and being black-pilled about it. But, I'm pretty white-pilled about at least that factor. So what we're going to see in Europe is potentially a lot of these European countries deciding whether they want to be pro-Washington or pro-Brussels. That over time, they may just make Brussels mean something much better than Washington, but there has to be more countries that fall under nationalist governments for that to happen. And that could happen later on this decade. It's very likely that a nationalist could take power in 2027 in France in the next presidential election. A strong right-wing government in Austria could take power and to be part of this power block along with Italy. And the fact that Italy now has a nationalist government is a huge change, a huge positive. Sweden could have a strong right-wing government. A lot of these places could, and if they form a power block, they're like, we're gonna have strong borders. We're gonna make Europe, mean something much more than these stupid human rights. And we're going to restore our sovereignty and restore our independence. We're not going to allow America and idiotic policies bully us around. You could see that. But for right now, a lot of these countries may view Washington as the more benevolent power to ally with more than Brussels, because Brussels is an immediate problem and imposes so many things on them, is more willing to impose things on them, and has the ability to do so and the leverage to threaten them. And this is why these nationalists seem far more anti-EU than they do America, because EU is their immediate problem while America is a distant problem. And so far, America, in the larger scale of things and the larger history of the world, America has been responsible for the decline in Europe, obviously, because we occupied Europe and defanged all their governments and military after World War II. But in the current time, they may view as America as the better partner than Brussels and want a closer relationship with America than they do with Brussels. Sometimes it doesn't work with the UK, but the UK is in a unique situation where, some of the country, like at least, they have all these parts of the country that want to secede and separate, and they're having to be even more reliant on America, and they still have these delusions that they can restore somewhat of their imperial power in the current era. That's just not going to happen. And so they have a lot of these issues. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I don't think that for the time being that Europe and Moscow and Russia are going to have closer ties, and that Russia is going to be part of any type of future European arrangement, primarily because of Eastern Europe and all these countries on the borderlands that absolutely hate Russia. And I think even Western Europe, even if they put an end to the war and restore some type of normal relations with Russia, they know that their future does not lie in being some part of Moscow-led power block, because most of Europe now hates Russia and sees them as the enemy and define themselves as being not Russia, and define themselves as seeing Russia as the hostile outside power, and they far prefer America. And that's just the way it is. So that is it for that topic. Now time to move along. So now we're going to turn to the campaign trail, or the American political sphere. And there's a few topics I want to talk about that are funny incidents that's happened. The funniest incident was Ron DeSantis doing these tours around the hurricane ravaged areas in Florida. and him getting upstaged by Joe Biden. One of the funniest, first off, there was the image of Ron DeSantis walking around in these ridiculous white rain boots. Now, I have to say this, like, Ron DeSantis, people are not making fun of him because he's like he is an athlete. He's an otherwise like a stud guy, but no matter how much of a stud you are, you can still look ridiculous, especially in white weather booties. And this is what he's walking around in them. He looks like he looks ridiculous. Like, why his team, his advanced team, his team is around him to know that, like, hey, you're gonna be taking photos of this. This looks bad. Do not wear that. But that's like a minor issue, just like a few memes. Like, people are gonna forget about it. But really, what came in for DeSantis is Joe Biden, Dark Brandon coming in and upstaging him. Anytime that they were together, Brandon was the sole focus. When DeSantis is talking about hurricane, he's like, we in Florida, we're doing all we can to help out everybody. And then in the background, Biden's just like chatting it up with all the people in the back, and he captures the audience's attention. Your attention is ignoring DeSantis, who is there just like talking in his boring style. Your focus is all on Biden, chatting it up with people in the back, with his aviators on, looking like he's a natural and a pro. And Biden was intentionally doing this because he wanted to humiliate DeSantis. DeSantis is maybe a presidential rival in 2024, depending on what happens with Trump. And he sees that DeSantis is trying to position himself as the anti-Biden, and Biden wants to show him who's the better politician. And he did this. And he went up on a stage. He's like, the governor agrees with me on climate change. And DeSantis could just sit there and, nod along. And he said that repeatedly, which is like embarrassing for DeSantis. And then there's the worst photo op ever where Chad Biden is out interacting, has like a MAGA boomer mom around his arm as he's chatting up with some guy with a Florida Cracker shirt on. And the guy is like thrilled. Both these people who look like stereotypical Trump voters look thrilled to talk with Biden. And Biden's just like aviators on or whatever. And in front of him is DeSantis walking like the Virgin versus Chad meme with his head down, looking like he's pouting. And it's such a bad photo. I mean, it's obviously these photos don't capture the exact moment of how they were, but it really did capture the energy between the two. Is that Biden is far more charismatic, far more of a natural politician, far more of a guy that is going to capture your attention when he's speaking than DeSantis. Like, DeSantis has like good lines and he says the right things, but when he's actually speaking, you're paying attention to the guy behind him chatting it up. And that's like a huge problem for DeSantis. The whole thing really showed up that when DeSantis is put in a hostile situation where he has to compete against another politician, and a politician who's far more charismatic than him, he looks bad. He is upstage. And this would happen, and I've always said this, like, if he was in a debate with Trump, Trump would annihilate him. Trump would just like destroy him. Like, this would never happen with Trump. If Trump did a joint event with any politician, he was always the center of focus. Always the center of focus. He has that commanding presence. He has that presence that your focus, even if someone is in front of him, like when he did these COVID press conferences, your attention and focus was on Trump, even if he wasn't speaking. And if DeSantis is like speaking and he's like, well, in Florida, we don't have these problems. We're so committed to hurricane relief. And, your whole focus is on Biden. That spells bad news. So this thing, and some of it wasn't like DeSantis' fault, but DeSantis should have been smart enough not to do these type of joint events with Biden if Biden was going to show him up. And sure enough, Biden did, and DeSantis can't do anything about that. So that's one thing to look at. And I do think it really shows the problems with DeSantis that are going to be further exposed as he's campaigning for office, as he's likely to campaign for office or campaign for the presidency in 2024. So moving along to the other political stories. Actually, one thing I want to mention is that I'll segue into this now. I wasn't going to plan to talk a little bit about something earlier, but one thing is that Trump's rallies are being a huge draw. I mean, one thing is that you compare Trump and DeSantis. DeSantis has been trying to do Trump-style rallies for other candidates. He's been going around the country doing rallies for people. He's like, hi, I'm Ron DeSantis in Florida. Everything's great. And not many people are attending. I guess people are nice, but they're not like these massive Trump rallies that he's doing. Trump, looks like he may be indicted, looks like he's having troubles, is still drawing thousands of people. High energy. These are great speeches. He's going through the motions. He's calling out the FBI. He's calling out the open borders. Like, he's really hitting the high notes in these rallies. And he's even inspiring people to say base things. Tommy Tuberville, who ran against Jeff Sessions. Most people saw him as the cucky guy, the moderate guy in that race in 2020 when he became Alabama senator. He was also a college football coach who was responsible for Ole Miss getting rid of the Confederate flag in the stands and to attract more black players when he coached for Ole Miss in the 90s. He's not anyone's impression of a base guy. Well, he had a very keyed commentary at one of these Trump rallies. I think it was the one in Nevada, where he's talking about, he got really angry. He's talking about how the Democrats are pro-crime and this stuff. And he's like, they want to give reparations to those who are doing the crime. Let me read the exact quote. And you have to rewatch this. He also said bullshit in this. He got very emotional. This was not like him just trying to please the audience. If you see this, a lot of Republicans are like, they're bad on crime and stuff and this stuff. He got really heated. He got really emotional about this stuff. So he thinks, he said, they are not soft on crime. They're pro-crime. They want crime. They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparations because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. And then he falls with that's bullshit. And it's like, wow, this is keyed. Let's go. I think this is probably one of the most keyed things I've heard a Republican say ever, or not ever, but in a while. Probably up there with Trump's shithole countries comment, or a lot of these guys, some of these Republicans talking about the great replacement. And even Blake Masters, who's doing the crime, and he's like, a lot of the people shooting each other are black. And so these are one of these truthful things that you don't see. And even with the reparations thing, Republicans really try to find black tokens to argue against reparations, and they use these kind of mild, moderate, boring arguments to this. This was a really heated argument that they want to take everything that you got and they want to give reparations to the people who are doing crime. And I was like, man, let's go, Tommy Tuberville. This is, and it's 100% true. It's that's exactly what they want to do. It's when it comes to that reparations debate, the reparations is all about hey, despite all the money and welfare and everything else that you've been putting into these communities, you still need to owe more directly. And it's well, who is responsible for a lot of these urban violence and crime and all these things that have happened to American cities? Look at Jackson, Mississippi. They like to blame white supremacy, but there's hardly any whites in Jackson, Mississippi. It's why, and they keep telling us that if they have a black exclusive place, it's going to turn in Wakanda. That doesn't look like Wakanda. It's the same in Detroit. It's the same in these other places. But they always try to blame white people for this stuff. And it's and then if whites move back, it's gentrification. So whites can't win either way. If they leave, it's white flight. If they come back, it's gentrification. And that's bad too. So it's what are whites supposed to do? I don't know, just cede everything. And when they cede everything, it's their fault for everything going bad. So it's very heated argument, and it's a good sign because I think, reparations is going to become a much bigger issue. I could see whoever the Democrat candidate is in 2024 making it one of the planks of his platform. Maybe not a central plank of his platform, but is definitely going to talk about it, is definitely going to endorse it. California is pursuing reparations. So are a lot of other places, towns and cities are looking into the matter. And so this is going to be a major issue. And if you have ordinary, normal Republicans who don't say anything based, like Tommy Tuberville, get really heated up at a Trump rally and just say this is bullshit, that's a good sign that that's how the average Republican, average Trump voter is going to respond to that, instead of saying well, maybe it'll solve racial problems, instead of them just being they want to give reparations to the people doing the crime, and they want to take everything that you've worked hard to earn, and they just want to give it away. And that's outrageous. That's bullshit. And so that's a reassuring comment. I don't think he hasn't made an apology yet, so we'll see what happens with that. Maybe he won't make an apology. I don't think Trump would make him demand he make an apology. So I think that was a good sign. So it's the same with these. A lot of these Republicans say accidentally based things. or maybe they're just like so well-meaning that they watch Tucker and that they listen to like some of the things they hear from conservative media, and their instincts kick in. All when they, despite all the media programming that they have and all the political correctness that they know they have to follow, they're just like, this is so abhorrent to me, this is so offensive to me that I want to speak out against this. A good example of this is Ron Johnson, who has said a lot. Has not been really the greatest Republican, but he's now been like very good about talking about January 6th. And he's also mentioned like great replacement and saying the Democrats want to replace the American people so they can have a permanent political majority. And it's like, and a lot of Republicans are now starting to say that. So it is like a white pill to see a lot of these Republicans do this rhetoric. And it's also a white pill to see the amount of support that Trump has and how Trump is really returning to form in these campaign stops. I think I haven't really seen Trump be this great on the trail in his speeches since late 2020. Right before the campaign ended, he was really good, but most of the time in like his presidency, he wasn't like hitting the high notes. He was trying to get people excited about black unemployment or what have you. And now this is like 2016 mode. So it's all good to see it. It's a preview of what he's going to be doing when he runs for president. And it's going to be a strong America First nationalist message that he's going to run with. And I think a lot of right-wing people are going to be happy with that. And so the final topic I want to talk about on the campaign trail is the Herschel Walker saga. I don't know even what much to say. I guess I have to bring it up because it's just like a funny incident. Is that like people... with Herschel Walker is that he keeps coming out that he had a ton of love children. That's one thing. And then his gay son, Christian Walker, which, they appear to have good relations, is now estranged from him and attacking him and saying about all the terrible things that Herschel did to his family. He's violent with his mom and he, didn't do a good job raising Christian Walker. And I guess how Christian Walker, the bizarre way that Christian Walker turned out, maybe Christian Walker has a point. And his current wife is apparently meeting with the woman that he allegedly paid to have an abortion. And apparently this woman now claims that that Herschel Walker tried to make her get a second abortion. So there's just a lot of problems with this. And so the things I want to talk, it's just like ridiculous. One thing I want to say is that this is not atypical for black sports stars, or even, actually, I wasn't about to say sports stars in general, but particularly black sports stars. All these guys have tons of illegitimate children. All these guys, and if they have tons of illegitimate children, you can know that they have like one or two baby mama that they try to pay off and get an abortion. I remember one time there was like a story about Adrian Peterson, who was like a really good running back, and one of his kids died, like it was like abused, like a stepfather, whoever the man was raising the child, like beat the kid to death or something of that sort. And that's like a sad story. And then it's like, wow, this is, sad. But it's like Adrian Peterson was hardly there for this kid. Like I think he just paid child support, like met him a few times, was hardly there in the kid's life. And I think it then came out he had like 7 other kids just like this. And I was like, what? And none of them with like women that he's married. So this is like very common for football players and basketball stars to have this many illegitimate children. And like even for the ones that, Herschel Walker was considered one of the squeaky clean ones too. He was not these type of players that you would have said like this guy's a thug and he's like a real shitbag. He was like always seen as like one of the good ones when he was at the height of his stardom. But even then, he has the same problems that all these guys have. And it would be the same with a lot of these football players. So it is like a risky move to, unless that guy had been like in a strong, like, marriage, he'd have been like in a same relationship since he was in college and they had like a happy family. There's a few examples like this. I think, they had a few black football players who were Republicans back in the day who were running for that. And they had relatively stable families. So it's not entirely of them, but it's not atypical. And there's a lot of these guys like that who have bizarre relations. Even with like some of these football players coming out, there's it's like one of the star players who like brutally murdered his white ex-girlfriend that has a story like that. And there was always these stories when I was a kid growing up and paying attention to the NFL, which now I have the Greer pledge and I'm not. And there would always be these stories about like Jerry Springer type family life that they had. They would beat the shit out of their girlfriend in like the middle of a McDonald's parking lot. And so all this stuff, and it's like O.J. Simpson is like the most famous case of this. And so this is just not like from left field, and they probably should have picked a different candidate. Some of this is Trump's fault, but I think they also didn't realize like to the extent of how bad it was. And even then, prior to the abortion claims, it looked like people were just going to overlook him having love children. And I don't know if I would say this is due to his race or his star power, but people don't care about these indiscretions as much as they did in the past. Gary Hart, famous candidate who was, he was expected to win the 88 nomination for the Democrats. He was a really strong contender. He had almost gotten the nomination in 84. He was a big deal, but in the 88 race, when he's the front runner, it was revealed he may have had an extramarital affair, and they had this image of like some hot girl on his lap and like in front of a boat. And like even when I was like in high school, they like showed like this is a famous scandal. It's like this guy may have had an extramarital affair with this hot woman. And it's like, wow, a politician having an affair. Like, color me shocked. I can't believe this is happening. Like, the amount of affairs that politicians have had is just like through the roof. Like, most powerful politicians, especially in the 20th century, were total horn dogs who were just like banging anything in sight. Like, this is not that uncommon. But just the fact that this came out, they're like, his campaign's over and he was never the front runner again. And Dukakis was the Democratic nominee. So it happened with Gary Hart. And even with like Bill Clinton was nearly derailed by these adultery allegations in 92. And the one way he was able to counter that was by pointing out the adultery allegations against George H.W. Bush. And there was always this worries that they had to hide adultery. But I think one thing with like Trump is that Trump's like sexual indiscretions were just like, through the roof. Like I think even JFK would have blushed at what he's done. And like people just don't care about that anymore. And it's like people are getting caught cheating and stuff. And now you have like female politicians who are caught cheating, and just like people don't care unless there's something wrong committed there. I remember Nashville had a mayor, Megan Barry, who was like a progressive Democrat who got there, and she had an affair with like one of her security detail. And the only reason that she was like had to resign was due to the fact that she was wasting taxpayer resources in pursuit of this affair. And it wasn't just like that. And it's the same with like a lot of these things. I mean, even like some of these characters who are like the FBI agents like Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, like they were having an affair on their respective spouses, and they were turned into heroes. And it's like they were found and they're sending these like bizarre text messages to each other, and even though they're both committing an affair. And now people don't care. And it's the same with Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. Both of them like obviously started their relationship when they were both married. They like to say that it's not true, but like if you have eyes to see, it's there. And literally no one cares about that, and no one bats an eye that they had this adultery. So there's a much more. And even when there came up a story about Kristi Noem, like people are like, there's an allegation that her and Corey Lewandowski were having an affair. I was like, at that time, I think it's not going to have an effect because one, it's a woman. People are even more forgiving of female indiscretions than they are of men. Like this is a society where women are forcing like open relationships and polyamory, and newspapers will celebrate women like cheating on their husband, and so will shows and this stuff. It's like, live it up, girl. You got it. You deserve that. And so it's not that odd that this is happening. And I'm pointing this out, and people are like, no, this might end it. And sure enough, even though there's an allegation there, she didn't sue over it. People just like shrugged their shoulders and didn't care. And so this was the same with like Herschel Walker's like love children, is that people were like, oh, well, what do you expect? But the only difference is with the paying for abortion, and he's not looking like his rebuttal to it is standing up, as this woman is like a mother of one of his children. And so he's got I don't know how he's going to win with this over his head. I mean, it is Georgia. People, they may accept affairs now. They may accept love children, but paying for an abortion as a Republican may be. There's been a few Republicans who have been accused of similar things, but I mean, in smaller races and in much more, heavily red districts. Whether he can survive or not, I think this may be one of those Senate seats that maybe gone to Republicans. We'll see. I mean, if Republicans still win this is like a huge turning point in American cultural history and how politics operate. It's gonna be so funny that Gary Hart lost his like political career was over due to this publication of one photo, a suggested photo with a hot young woman on his lap, and that was over 30 years ago, and now somebody can get elected to office with like fairly credible accusations that he paid for abortion. It's just like a complete change in American life. So that's my thoughts on the political situation going on. And before we go to the Cognitive Elite questions, which I have two today, but they're on the same topic, so I'll name drop both of them. I want to celebrate another white pill, is how much conservatives are joining into the campaign to have common sense pit bull reform. Now, I've been warning about pit bulls for years. Actually, back in my Daily Caller days in 2018, I wrote a lot about pit bulls. I think they deleted a lot of my pit bull articles. They haven't deleted most of my archive, but for some reason, my pit bull articles are missing. I find that weird. There's a couple random articles that aren't even offensive that are missing as well. All right, I'm having trouble to find, but my Pitbull articles are. I had the funniest, though. My favorite was when I decided to do them as Newsbeat, and I'd write them as like horror stories, and like that a Pitbull. There was one story where a Pitbull accidentally like hit like a dude's gun and shot him, and I wrote it the way that the Pitbull had become anthropomorphic and had like picked up the gun and aimed it at the owner and shot the owner. Every story was like written like in gripping tones about like this Pitbull saw the kid running and then immediately latched on and attacked, and it was like a really dramatic novel style telling of these Pitbull stories. And there were huge hits too, like the Pitbull beat I did. I left the caller. I never got fired. I left it to do some other work before I got doxxed. But I was having a lot of good time with Pitbull stories. And they were still, even when I was not working there, wanting me to like contribute Pitbull stories to the Pitbull beat there. But I really did it. And one thing about Pitbull owners is like, they're the most vicious people on Twitter. Like, I unfortunately have closed DMs. For many, many reasons. I've never regretted it. And people who would like share my stuff, they'd be like, I have someone like threatening to rape and murder me, like a Pitbull owner. It's like somebody on their own face, like own Avi, be like, you should be tortured to death for what you're saying about pit bulls. And they're just like the most obnoxious owners. Like, if you have a pit bull, like, you really announce yourself as trash. Like, no matter what race or, background or whatever you are, if you have a pit bull, it's trash. I mean, you're announcing a lot about yourself. They even are like I've had some people I know who've had pit bulls, and they like can be friendly, but they're like aggressive in their friendliness, and that they can just like snap at a moment's notice. Like, it's very different from German Shepherds. Like, German Shepherds can be intimidating dogs, but you don't really have to worry if they know that you're like a friend. They're not going to snap on you like that. Like, German Shepherds are knights. Pit bulls are like a certain demographic, that they'll snap at a moment's notice, low impulse control. But that's like the difference between shepherds and knights. I mean, shepherds do have some dog bite attacks in them, but generally you're not as worried about them as pit bulls going off. And also, pit bulls are responsible for 70% of dog bite fatalities, and there's becoming more and more of them. Like, pit bulls are like the official dog of modern America. Like, they are really representative of this type of, even though for the right they always want to like defend what the working class is, there is a type of new proletariat emerging that is different from the working class of the right's imagination. The right imagines like the working class as these upstanding guys going to church every day, working in the factory. It's very much of a 1950s image of what the working class is. Working class is very different now. It's not, it's decreasingly white. Even in the rural areas, it's still largely white, but even in those areas, like, they're getting replaced by Hispanics and others. It's, heavily tattooed up. It's like heavily into weed. They're not going to church at all. I'm not wanting to condemn like working class at all. There's some people who come from humble backgrounds who resist this and do this, but like the stereotypical like proletariat culture of America is like NFL, pit bulls, tattoo, and weed and Marvel movies. Like, this is it. And rap. And that's why the Greerhead Pledge is demanding that you resist it. Like, I am adding new things to the Greerhead Pledge. We've got to say, I will not smoke the weed. I will not own the pit bull. I will not listen to the rap. I will not watch the NFL. I will not go see the latest Marvel movie. Like, if you do that, man, you are ahead. You are resisting the culture. You are positive. You know, and I will stay white-pilled. You will be white-pilled after this with the Greerhead Pledge. So I'm having to add all that in. But it's like, all together, I don't want to add tattoos to it because I do know some. For men, I'm not that opposed to it. It's depending on your background and if you have like you're like sensible with it. Like, if you're like a working class guy or a veteran, like, you know, and I understand you getting a tattoos, and people have had tattoos for a long time, but it's more of a problem with women, especially middle class and upper class women getting tattoos than it are just people going overboard with like neck and face tattoos. So I don't want to add I will not get tattoos to it, you know, for understanding of people who may come from a different background. But I will add the other things with it. But there is like a general proletariat culture that, and I think it's some people who are obsessed with this idea of the working class revolution or the multiracial working class, that they just like love all these aspects. But when they're confronted with it, like with their love of pit bulls, the love of tattoos, love of weed, love of, you know, all this type of stuff that they might frown upon, love of flat bill hats, you know, they're going to be like, maybe I'm not a fan of this. So it's willing to criticize. You know, we want them to be better versions of themselves. We don't want them to wallow in the American proletariat culture. We want them to rise above that. And I think in some ways, pit bulls come down to the worst is that they're like vicious dogs, and everyone will just like come to defend them. And this story comes out is because this family, it was a white family. You wouldn't think that they're that trashy. They didn't look trashy when they were covered up, but the husband, like, there's a beach photo and he has like the worst tattoos imaginable all over him. And it's like, okay, now we understand why they're such pit bull fanatics. And then they get into this, and like the pit bull like brutally murdered this woman's 2 kids. She had a heart attack after it, you know, and she obviously paid the price for the pit bulls. But it's such a horrific story, and these happen all the time. Like, when I was like actually covering the pit bull beat, there was all these stories about the pit bulls attacking their owner. Sometimes they even pulled a gun on them. So you have to really watch out for this stuff, and it's really just like the worst thing. It's like, you know, avoid pit bull ownership. There's much better dogs to get. Maybe they might be a little bit more expensive. Maybe they might be, you know, a little bit harder to find, but, you know, don't go for it. And like, just a serious commitment to this. Like, and they're like, just look at my little fur baby. And it has like flowers on them and stuff. It's like, wow, look at this. And that was my original tweet about this over 4 years ago, probably like 4.5 years ago. I think this is like April or March of 2018. Is my original tweet about this was like pit bull owners in favor, like the pit bull debate illustrated. It's like people in favor of pit bulls, and it's like one cute picture of a pit bull versus data. And I did like this picture of like a pit bull with like flowers on its head versus like a graph showing pit bull bite fatalities. And that's what the whole debate is. It's like, well, my pit bull isn't like that. And then every owner who gets attacked by a pit bull, or their kids get attacked by a pit bull, says the same damn thing. You know, it's not the exception. So you shouldn't listen to these arguments. So I'm very thrilled that like conservatives are getting on this issue. Like, it's like mainstream conservatives are getting on it. Like, I saw Michael Knowles tweeting about it. I saw Jack Posobiec's tweeting a lot about it. It's really catching on, and people are getting really woken up to this issue. So I'm pretty white-pilled about that. Now on to the Cotton Elite questions. And we have 3 today. I think I said 2, but one of the question was asked by 2 different people. So we're going to give a shout out to them. But as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the highly respected, or, you know, sometimes we mess up. If you sign up for the Cotton Elite option at highly respected Substack, and that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And if you haven't already, make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. And this first question comes from Johnny Chungus, and he asked for my thoughts on what I think about Ben Sasse resigning and what the conspiracy theories around it. I'm not sure what conspiracy theories he meant, but maybe it's he may be referring to the fact that people think that this is DeSantis's way of sticking to Trump. I don't think that's it at all. I think because it was somebody underneath DeSantis who did this. And I think Ben Sasse realized that he's not going to become president ever. And he's probably bored of the Senate. He's probably bored of the fact that like it's such a Trump controlled party. And he would rather do something else because Ben Sasse did look like somebody who wanted to run for president. This was like a very clear fact in 2016. I always thought that if they're actually going to put their like serious effort into somebody challenging Trump in 2020, that they may solidify behind Ben Sasse. And even when I thought after 2020 that, you know, if they wanted to have a anti-Trump candidate for 2024, that they may rally behind Ben Sasse. But Ben Sasse is a rational person. He realizes the whole party is controlled by Trump, and he realizes he has no real political future after voting for Trump's impeachment and being anti-Trump guy. So, and he's not moving up much in the Senate. It also prevents him from gaining a leadership spot as he sees what happened to Liz Cheney in the House. So he's probably like, I'm done with this. I'd rather do something else. I'd make a lot more. And maybe he wanted to make a lot of money being president of University of Florida. And so that's why he took the job. I really have always hated Ben Sasse from 2016 because he was like totally into this, like, America is an idea. America. And it's like, wow, that's so brilliant and intellectual. Republicans just won't say that. And he was just like, Trump is just not into America as an idea. And what about liberty? And then, he sucked up to Trump when he needed an endorsement. Trump shouldn't have endorsed him, but he then did that, and Ben Sasse then paid him back by voting for his impeachment, but Ben Sasse's political career is over, and now he's going there. He might do a fine job. It's like probably better that you have like these horrible Republicans run a university rather than, the standard liberal who's going to be there. Maybe he might introduce some interesting ideas, but he still sucks. I don't think that, like, there are some even conservatives who like even lean to more the pro-Trump side or try to be national populists who are like celebrating this move. It's like not that big of a deal. But it is funny how all these people get pedestaled for being anti-Trump. And they're like, they're the future of the Republican Party. They're going to be such big heroes. And then people forget about them. Like, people forgot about Ben Sasse. Like, people aren't even talking about Mitt Romney anymore. And the same is going to happen with Liz Cheney in a year or two. Like, probably no one's going to be talking about Liz Cheney in 2024. I mean, she may have like a stupid bid for the presidency, but she's not going to get any votes. And she's not going to go anywhere. Maybe that's like the last time people ever talk about her is in 2024. Or maybe she tries to like endorse the Democrat in the hopes that that Democrat will point her to something. I doubt that will happen. And so a lot of these people, their careers are just over, that they look promising before Trump and maybe they had a certain amount of charisma. Like Ben Sasse was like good on TV. He was like a good speaker. And he was probably a little bit smarter than most politicians, but he is just like insufferable. And he really thought he was like a genius because he, could recite the Federalist Papers or something, or could quote from the Federalist Papers, like just like a standard basic bitch conservative. It's great that he's gone from the Senate, and he's at least smart enough to realize that his political career was over, or his future in like what he wanted to do as a Republican, probably eventually run for president or be a powerful Republican. He had very few low chances of that due to voting for Trump's impeachment. So, farewell to Ben Sasse. We probably won't ever hear about him much going forward. He'll just be like Mitch Daniels. Mitch Daniels was somebody that a lot of Republicans wanted to run for president, and he was a governor of Indiana. He's now, president or chancellor of Purdue University. He's implemented interesting ideas there. But, at the end of the day, he was not going to be a president. He's not going to be competing against the people who Republicans actually want for office. So that's it for that convolute question. And I just want to say, I don't know if I cited his name, but just to double check, that was from Johnny Chungus. So I want to give him a shout out. I was worried I didn't. So that's from Johnny Chungus. And I have to make sure I give a shout out for the next question. Now, a lot of people may be wondering, it's like, hey, there's a big topic that Scott hasn't talked about yet, and we want to wait for this. And like, I've been saving it up because two different people asked about this. And that's, of course, asking for my thoughts on the latest Kanye West scandal. I guess we should call him Ye, because he's no longer, that's his legal name. He's no longer Kanye, but we're going to call him Kanye no matter what. And this both Jay and Cargo Shorts Respecter both asked for my thoughts on Kanye, so I'll give those here. I think it's his latest stuff is like great content. Like no matter when Kanye's in the news, especially when he's like pissing off liberals, it is incredible content because I mean he is like one of the biggest entertainers in the world. And so whatever he says becomes news stories, and it's like still like great content and fun that this is like happening. And there's like two sides to this scandal because there's the first of him doing the White Lives Matter. Well, there's three. There's like first him doing White Lives Matter at this fashion show, which the fashion show was like pretty keyed because it's talking about how imagining a world where whiteness is gone. And it's about like saying White Lives Matter, like whites have disappeared. I guess it's like a show where the Great Replacement has like completed his goals. You know, he's into that. Or that was like the fashion show. So that was like the first controversy. Then the second is him giving a Tucker Carlson interview, which was mostly playing up to conservatives, what they wanted to hear. But there were some murmurs of something they didn't want to hear. And then there's the third of him declaring DEFCON 3 on the Jewish people, which he then said that he can't be anti-Semitic because, one, Jesus is Jewish and that blacks are the true Jews. So he went full black Israelite. So there's just a lot going on here that we have to go for. My main thoughts is like, I think this is really entertaining. It's great content. I don't really take it that seriously. I think some people may be taking it a little bit more seriously than others. There's few things that need to, I find what's interesting is how conservatives are reacting to it because conservatives don't have many entertainers on their side. And when one of the biggest entertainers in the world is, putting on a MAGA hat, saying, he's pro-life, he's saying he's like a devout Christian, and his like whole life is based around God, that gets people really excited. And I can understand where they're coming from. And it's also like very exciting when he's like this black guy who is, when in the 2000s his big controversy was saying George W. Bush doesn't care about black people, and he was like intentionally trying to get New Orleans flooded by Hurricane Katrina. Now he's like wearing White Lives Matter shirts, so it's a big turnaround. It's like also funny that he's like been a big deal for I think roughly 20 years. I think he burst on the scene in 2002 or 2003, somewhere around the before the mid 2000s. But he's been a big deal for a long time. I remember even one time, this had to be this is pre his Katrina thing, what he ranted about George W. Bush, I think, is that he, Daily Show was doing a commercial for like their latest show, and they're like, people are saying the Iraq War is like the new Afghanistan. Does that mean Gold Digger is the new Fortunate Son? Of course, Gold Digger was Kanye's big song at the time. And so they were saying that as like a joke. And it's imagining that like somebody who was that big enough that they could just reference his song and people would instantly get that. And then, 18 years later or so, people still know he's still a big deal. People are still talking about him. Probably much more in a cultural sense than even then because, he's not putting out or he's still putting out music. I don't really follow Kanye. I don't really like his music. I don't like, as I said, part of the Greer Head Pledge is not to listen to rap. So I'm not listening to rap very often. Going back to his comments, I got to dissect many portions of this. The White Lives Matter thing, it's not the most serious thing in the world, but it is like funny to put out in the public sphere and have people debate it because all these people are like, this is a hate symbol. This is like, how dare he say that? And it's like, are you saying white lives don't matter? And they're like, well, no, I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. Or they're like, oh, you just can't say that. And it's like, why can't you say white lives matter? And so it creates this type of discourse where the normies hear this and they're like, why do people have a problem with that? And then it realizes like, oh, anti-white racism is an underlying principle of our society, and you just can't say it's okay to be white. You can't say white lives matter. You just can't do any of that stuff. And you have to have somebody like Kanye West to expose that and to show how ridiculous this is. Most people would just say that. It's like, oh, what's wrong with that? They say, and even normies are like, well, they say black lives matter. Do white lives don't matter? And then they have to go through these mental gymnastics to explain to you why this is a racist statement or what have you. And it's like, well, this is used by hate groups. It's like, well, who cares? Like, people know what that means, and like Kanye can do that. And the fashion show itself was like had a key concept of imagining a world where whiteness had disappeared. So you have to say white lives matter, so that doesn't happen. That's the other thing. And his Tucker interview, it was like a funny interview because he went into bizarre tangents and other things, but he did get into funny things like he criticized obesity, he was pro-life, he was doubling down on White Lives Matter, he was attacking Jared Kushner. And even his like obesity comments, I think were pretty base because it's like funny that you need like popular entertainers to say that, to say like it's clinically unhealthy. Like it's wrong to promote it. And he's like going after Lizzo, and Lizzo had an epic clapback for Kanye for attacking her weight. And this is it. Lizzo said, in Canada, I feel like everybody in America got my motherfucking name and they motherfucking mouth for no fucking reason. Motherfucking reason. I'm minding my fat, beautiful black business, or my fat, black, beautiful business. And everyone's like, wow, that's so epic. And like, how is that a clapback? And of course, she's wearing some horrific outfit in this. This thing. And that's what, but Kanye was right about that. He's like saying this is like really negative promoting, and they promote this. No, it did get weird because it's like Tucker asked him like, well, why are they promoting this stuff? And then Kanye's like, yo, they're trying to do black genocide. I'm like, I don't think that's the case, but sure, whatever, we'll have that. And there was an account that pointed out that like maybe people should be a little hesitant about going full in on Kanye because he is like ultimately a black Israelite. He's going to go full black Israelite. And sure enough, just a few days later, he did when he announced he was going DEFCON 3. Once again, it's 3 on the Jewish people, which he got this wrong. First off, it would be DEFCON 3. And DEFCON 3 is not nuclear war. DEFCON 3 is like where, you're ready. Like there may be nuclear war on foot. You're being more alert to this problem, not that you're going full nuclear war. So it's like really just funny. Like first off, he misspelled it as DEFCON, and then like it would have been like DEFCON 1 that he maybe wanted to go with, but whatever. The point was made that he's like threatening to go after Jewish people, and he was like saying like blacks are the real Jews. And this is what's up. And it's like, as much as the black Israelites are into that, and now they locked his account. They locked his account on Instagram for making vague, anti-Semitic assertions to P. Diddy. I'm pretty sure he goes by P. Diddy now, or maybe just Diddy. He's gone through many names like Puff Daddy and others. We're going to call him P. Diddy. It may be just Diddy now, but who knows? We're just calling him P. Diddy. And this about how he's controlled by the Jewish people, and Instagram locked him, and then Twitter locked him for this stuff, and people are really going after him now. And so there's like a lot of things. I think one thing that's really illustrated is like how conservatives loved all his past comments, but they're not going along with the stuff about the Jewish people. Fox and Friends had this segment about how like it's so bad that they're censoring him for being a conservative, for being a free thinker, and then they see the tweets that he's banned for, or he's locked out of his account for. And they were initially saying like, oh, how terrible this is. And then they showed up the tweet and it's like, wow, this is very ugly. How dare he say this? So they completely flipped on a dime when it came to this topic. And I think actually for most normal conservatives, I don't know if they'd say ugly. They're just like, what? It's like, especially the blacks are the real Jews. Like, what? What? They'd be very confused by this comment. And I think most of it would just be kind of confusion. And people are all talking about like, oh, he's moving the Overton window on that subject. For the people that are going to most positively respond to that, it's like the funny dynamic here is that blacks were really upset about his White Lives Matter comment, but normal conservatives were fine with that. And normal conservatives were thrilled with his Tucker interview. But blacks were offended by that, but they're going to be the ones more supportive of his comments, his DEFCON 3 comments, because a lot of them make these comments. Like Nick Cannon made these comments a few years ago, and he had to do a book report on anti-Semitism for that. Ice Cube and a lot of these old rappers back in the 90s were making similar statements in their songs and in their interviews. So this is pretty common among the black community to express a lot of this stuff. And I think they'll be very supportive. Like, why are they locking him out for saying this stuff? Like, why are they suspending him? While most of these white conservatives who are in favor of Kanye are going to be, distancing themselves from Kanye. So it's like, once again, like he was like one day he's the greatest conservative hero there is. And then the next day they're quietly backing away from him. Like, who's Kanye? We're not that big of fans of him. And just moving on from the situation. So what's going to happen with Kanye is that I think a lot maybe with like Trump that they're just going to lock him out. I think there's this understanding that Kanye, he's like a talented artist. Well, by the world standards, he's a talented artist. I will give him that. He is like a successful entrepreneur. He's made a ton of money. There's something to go with that. It does indicate a level of intelligence with him, but he's like his interviews are just rambling and he does, but he does have a lot of mental problems. He does have a lot of issues. And he is going through a lot of turbulence in his own life, with his divorce from Kim Kardashian, and his war on Pete Davidson that he had when he was dating Kim Kardashian. But he's always a provider of great content. I think he's really, really entertaining, not from his musical perspective, but just from his other things he's doing. He may have to go back to his meds and they may talk him down, and maybe he might have to do like what Nick Cannon did in a book report on how what he did was wrong. I don't think he'll go as far as Nick Cannon because he is like, a little bit imbalanced, but he may, he's back on his meds or he goes to therapy or whatever. He comes out and he's just like, I'm not going to talk about politics anymore. It's the same when he got really into being pro-Trump in 2018. He became a conservative star and they're like all fans of him. And then he's like, and I'm not going to talk about politics anymore. Now, this is when he's still married to Kim Kardashian. And she told him like, you have to stop talking about politics. And he listened. And so he moved away from that. It'll be interesting to see what he does next and what happens. I think what the big tech is like, we're going to hope that, we're going to silence him for now. We're going to keep him off social media. Maybe he goes back on his meds or whatever. And he just ditches talking about politics and we can move on from here. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. But it is interesting what he says. And I think I don't think in like the moving Overton window, like black rappers have been saying that stuff for a long time. And for a lot of white conservatives, they're not offended, but they're more confused by that stuff. And especially when it's mixed in with this stuff like saying blacks are the real Jews. And so that's not going to change any of their opinions on that. I think a lot of right-wing Twitter is saying that. But I think when it had the initial focus on the White Lives Matter stuff, and if that had become like a month-long ordeal, and there was people who were agreeing with it, or like other celebrities, like Sharon Osbourne was like, I agree that Black Lives Matter was a scam. And what's wrong with saying White Lives Matter? Are you not saying that? And there's a ton of people saying that. And that's the type of discussions you have to have. And so no matter the source of it, even if you're not the biggest Kanye fan or whatever, as long as they're providing these discussions and illustrating the weird dynamics of America and these weird conflicts that are happening, because I do think it is like very interesting when these conflicts between these black rappers and them saying these, black Israelite things on many questions come up, and that becomes a main issue. It is interesting how it illustrates and how big tech responds to that, and how these corporations illustrate that or respond to that, and then what happens when they, go on anti-white rants and just nobody cares. So I think it is what's going to happen is that Kanye is kept off social media for a while, and then he comes back and he's like, I'm not talking about politics ever again. And he does that, and maybe like a year later he has like another similar event that he engages in. So we'll see. I mean, he may realize that it could harm his business interests, and he needs to calm down. And there are people who talk to him, and if he's off social media, maybe he'll just realize he can't, he's not going to be able to exist as a successful businessman if he keeps going off. So that's my thoughts on Kanye. That's it for today's episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We're going to, of course, have a great IQ supplement later this week, so tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.